If you want to avoid making some expensive mistakes in Cappadocia, you're in the right place. I've spent a full month here in Turkey, and I spent some time in Cappadocia, and I did make some expensive mistakes, so I'm going to tell you how to avoid those so you can learn from me. The first thing to know is that there are two airports that you could fly into when visiting Cappadocia. The first is called Nevşehir, and that is about 40-minute drive from all of the towns that make up the Cappadocia region, and the other is Kayseri, and that one is a little bit more. It's about an hour and 15-minute drive depending on traffic. So keep that in mind if you're trying to shorten your trip. There are more flights to the further one, but the closer airport does provide that better experience. But one of the biggest mistakes that I made really early on in my trip was I didn't pre-arrange transportation, which meant I had to take a taxi over to where I was staying. The taxi rates were really expensive. They were like $60 for that 40-minute trip, and that was standard. I had to pay that on the way there and the way back. Not fun. So a couple of options on how to avoid that. First one is to just ask your hotel if they have a better rate or can set you up with a cheaper option. Second is you can go third party and try to book a bus or shuttle that is a little bit cheaper. But if I could do it all over, I wouldn't even worry about shuttles. I wouldn't worry about taxis, none of that. I would just rent a car. I really do think Cappadocia is a place that enhances the experience if you have a rental car, and that's for a few reasons. One, there's not just one little town. There's a bunch around, and there's wonderful things to see in each of those different spots, but they're all like 10, 15-minute drive away from one another. So if you don't end up having a rental car, you're gonna have to pay for some sort of taxi, and it's not gonna get super expensive, but you're probably gonna pay between 10 to 20 US dollars each time you're hopping around to different towns. And that does add up where the car rentals are really, really cheap there, and I would have ended up saving a lot of money if I just would have rented a car. So if you do want to rent a car, I've always used a company called discovercars.com. Fair warning, they are not fancy. They are a budget carrier, but that's kind of why I use them. I'm not looking to pay much money, so I'll leave a link if you want to check them out, but I know they have options available in that region. Now, I'll get to a bunch of hot air balloon stuff as well as my biggest mistake that I made in just a minute, but I do want to talk about where you should actually stay. I think a lot of tourists end up making the mistake of thinking that Göreme is the only place that you can stay, and that is like the tourist hotspot, but like I said, there are so many little towns all around that you can pick really any of them, and each of them has a slightly different feel. We ended up staying in Ürgüp, and it was a wonderful option for us. We ended up actually staying at this ridiculously fancy hotel called the Sacred House. We were celebrating my wife's birthday. It was a really special occasion. I normally wouldn't recommend a hotel in that price point, but it really was just by far the nicest hotel that we've ever stayed at. So if you are looking for that elevated experience, might be worth your time checking them out. Let's talk about some of the hot air balloon tips, because there are a lot around this. The first tip that is really important with the hot air balloons is that you should book it as early as possible in your trip. And I don't mean time of day, I mean early in terms of the days that you are there. Let's say you're gonna go to Cappadocia for 3 days. You should plan for that hot air balloon on the very first day. And the reason is a lot of the time these flights get canceled because the weather conditions have to be pretty much perfect for it. And it's not uncommon at all for there to be cancellations due to a little bit of wind, a little bit of rain. Something will easily throw this off, and it's only the morning when you're gonna be able to fly. Afternoons, forget about it. It's morning or nothing. So if you book that on day one of your trip, if it does get canceled, all these tour operators, what they'll do is they'll say, hey, it's canceled today, but tomorrow you're back on, and they give you preferential treatment, so you still have your reservation. So the mistake that a lot of tourists end up getting into is they save that for the second or third day, weather cancels it, and all of a sudden, shoot, they have travel plans to get out, and they don't actually get to ever go on the hot air balloon. So keep that in mind. Another thing with the pricing of the hot air balloons is that there are a lot of different operators, and I'm not here to tell you which operator is best or worst. Do your research on that, but recognize that prices are all gonna be pretty much the same. Some of the big operators will have slightly higher prices, but recognize that the time of season and even just the week that you go will really have prices fluctuating. If you look up online, you'll see a lot of people saying, oh man, I got one for $100. I think we had to pay close to 300 US dollars for ours, and they're constantly fluctuating based on how is the weather? Is it high tourism season? And how much availability do we actually have on these? So keep that in mind, but also recognize that I have heard of some folks who they don't actually reserve anything. They wait until the day before and they say, hey, can I get any discounted rate? And some people report that working. I don't have experience with that myself, but if you're that budget traveler who's saying, hey, I can only afford this price or I'm not doing it at all, that might be an option for you, is to wait till that very last day. Another thing to recognize is that with all of these hot air balloon rides, you're gonna wake up really early in the morning, so make sure that you plan the night before to get some rest because you don't wanna be tired and exhausted going on that crazy experience. And also make sure to pack really warm clothes for it. Even if it's the summer like it is right now for me, when we went, I was shivering. I made the mistake. I actually went on the hot air balloon in this, and that was not enough for me. I was cold. It's early in the morning. You're going pretty high up there, so keep that in mind. I'm gonna get to two really big mistakes that I made in just a minute, but another thing that I definitely think you should be aware of is when you are booking the hot air balloon, sometimes you'll see something called first or second flight. And what that means is each morning, let's say they're having the flights at 6 a.m., there'll be a second flight at 6:15 a.m., and that's just to make sure that there aren't too many hot air balloons going up at once for safety reasons. So it's important for you to know that so you can decide, do I want to be the first air balloon up or do I want to be in that second wave? There are pros and cons to both. If you're on that first wave up, you're the first one up. You're going up as the sun rises, but if you wait until that second wave, you're gonna have a unique perspective for pictures because that whole first wave is gonna go up. You'll be on the ground to be able to take all the pictures going up, and then you'll still get up there. So there's really not a better or worse, it's just your own preference, but be aware of those and then pick accordingly. But I wanna tell you about one of the biggest mistakes that I made, and it's we had a wonderful pilot, a wonderful crew who just made sure that we were enjoying ourselves the entire time, and we did. It was lovely. But at the very end, they popped some champagne bottles and they're like, hey, if you want to give us any extra appreciation in the form of a tip, we're certainly happy to accept them. And I thought that they were going to be able to accept some form of card payment, for tips. They didn't. It was cash only, and I didn't have any cash, so I felt like I shortchanged them. I felt really bad about that. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, I really would like to give a tip, just make sure that you have some cash so you can take care of that crew after. They definitely deserved it, and it's something that I feel really, really bad about. Now, I'll tell you about my absolute biggest mistake in just a second, but I think it's really important to note that a lot of tourists make the mistake of thinking, hey, when I visit Cappadocia, I'm just going for the hot air balloons and then I'm gonna get out. No, there is so much more to do. In fact, some of the excursions, in my opinion, were actually better than the hot air balloon experience. And that's not saying that the hot air balloon experience was bad by any means. It wasn't. It was fantastic. But we did this horseback riding excursion where, oh my God, it was just unbelievable. We were riding horsebacks through the canyons. We stopped up at like the cave homes and saw like this church, had some fresh squeezed like pomegranate and orange juice walking through the caves. The horses were beautiful. We had little pups, guiding us the whole way. It was all at sunset. Like it was just gorgeous. And there were so many other excursions that we didn't even have the time to take part in. So I think that's something that's important to recognize is it's not just the hot air balloons. And this leads me to my biggest mistake, which was not planning to stay long enough. We went for 2 nights. That was it. And then we got out. If I could do it over again, I would stay in Cappadocia for like realistically 3 to 5 days at minimum because there's so much there, there's so much to see, and I definitely wish that we would have had more time. And if you're planning on visiting Istanbul in this trip, definitely be sure to watch these 2 videos on things that I wish I knew before visiting Istanbul because I've spent 2 months there and yeah, there's a lot to know. So I hope all this was helpful and we'll catch you guys next time.